Happy Valentine's to everybody. James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Gorge from director Scott Derrickson, a movie which on the surface appears to be a lean and mean, down and dirty, action-packed science fiction thriller. It's actually a very flirtatious, sexy Valentine's Day treat for couples that I think, even though everybody's going to be talking about Captain America Brave New World this weekend, the better movie to be seen is The Gorge. And I don't want to overstate the case. I think The Gorge is one half of a really good movie, one third kind of a mediocre movie, which mathematically leaves, let me do some quick number crunching, that would leave 1/6 remaining to kind of stick the landing, and it does. But I'll take one half of a really good movie any day as opposed to like a complete and total mediocrity. But the official premise or the official story ripped straight from IMDb is as such, two highly trained operatives become close after being sent to protect opposite sides of a mysterious gorge. When an evil emerges, they must work together to survive what lies within. And the way I would describe it is you basically have two elite snipers falling in love while guarding this proverbial doorway into hell. And I'm not going to spoil what is within the gorge because I feel like the movie's at its best when it allows the mystery at the bottom of the gorge to remain a mystery. Your imagination is far more powerful than anything that could ever be put on the screen. And I think this movie's fatal flaw is that it allows the imagination to fill in the gaps. Whereas in the first half of the movie, it's a little bit like a survival horror video game where every wave of attacks gets more threatening and more terrifying, where you know eventually these two snipers and all their machine guns and whatnot will eventually be overwhelmed, and that tension keeps building. But then, anyway, I don't want to get too negative too early on because the first half of the movie, I was kind of falling in love with it because the stars, Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller, I think they went above and beyond the Call of Duty on selling the audience on the fact that they are turned on by each other. They can't wait to get into each other's pants in spite of the fact that they are separated by this giant gorge, and they just seem to be having an absolute blast every step of the way. Like whether they're competing with their sniper rifles just to pass the time, or dancing with each other, or writing notes. It's a little bit like when you're texting with somebody where you're kind of flirting with them, like in the early days where you're really excited with each text. When they hold up those signs, it's fun, it's infectious, it's flirtatious, and I think that's why it's the perfect Valentine's Day treat. And it's a really unusual change of pace for Scott Derrickson, who, in spite of the fact that he made Doctor Strange from Marvel, I associate him primarily with a certain style of low-budget horror movie. I mean, he made Sinister and Sinister 2, The Black Phone, and The Black Phone 2 was absolutely on my radar for later on this year. The Gorge was not on my radar at all. And I guess one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video is because I'm kind of getting sick and tired of the fact that Apple seems to just absolutely have, like, they seem to give zero fucks about any of the shows or movies that they make. Like, they spend so much money making these like perfectly professional and unpolished, like beautiful looking shows and movies, and then they just kind of drop them into the black hole of Apple TV Plus, never to be seen or heard from ever again. And I just feel like they're doing a massive disservice to all these shows and movies. If people are not aware of your movies or they're not part of the cultural conversation, like why spend all that money in the first place? They just seem to make their shows and movies like they feel like such an afterthought. And obviously Apple's got other things on their mind. They're selling phones and computers and that sort of thing, but they could afford to at least do like a limited theatrical release for a movie like The Gorge, where if you had a limited theatrical release that at a minimum could cover just the marketing costs of print and advertising, more people would review it, more people would talk about it. And when a movie plays in a theater and you share that experience with an audience, it just has a certain cultural stickiness or a longer shelf life. It actually feels real and tangible. I just feel like movies that are released straight onto a streaming service, they just feel like content and they vanish, never to return. So as somebody with a YouTube channel devoted to movies, I'm obviously going to tackle the big topics like Captain America Brave New World. But the fun side of the channel is when you make a fresh discovery, when something kind of blindsides you, comes out of nowhere, a movie that was not on your radar at all, and then punches above its weight class, because this movie, it's basically got 3 speaking roles: Miles Teller, Anya Taylor-Joy, and Sigourney Weaver, living legend. And it's got a few simple locations, and most of which obviously was shot on a soundstage. But I feel like, I don't know what the budget of this movie is, and Apple can be a little secretive, but whatever the budget was, I presume it was small. But this is one of those movies that punches way above its weight class and delivers far more entertainment value than a lot of other movies that have considerably larger budgets. And I think what it boils down to is that Scott Derrickson, he does all the basics with maximum kind of efficiency, where every little sequence is designed to have maximum impact from his choice of Dutch angles or through his editing style and his rhythms. But he's trying to make even simple things like putting film reels on a projector very exciting, where it's like, quick cuts in rapid succession with great angles. Or at one point when Miles Teller decides he finally has had enough flirting, and as you see in the trailer, he decides to cross the gorge and spend an evening with this lovely sniper. And they turn it into this great little sequence where he's trying to get the line across. And when you see Anya Taylor-Joy kind of launching herself into action to aid and abet in that endeavor, it's just incredibly exciting, fun, contagious filmmaking. And I was just having an absolute blast. And then we get to the point of the movie where they go into the gorge, and it's like, all right. Either they're going to show us something amazing that we can never possibly imagine, or the movie now is going to become a disappointment. And I think the weakest part of the movie is everything that happens in the gorge. It just turns into yet another exposition-heavy, kind of bland, predictable science fiction movie, whereas beforehand, it was a sexy, flirtatious movie that periodically would be interrupted by awesome action. There's an action scene early on in the movie. I was like, holy shit, like this might be the best action scene we will see all year, where you have Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy just unleashing hell as these bad guys come crawling out of the gorge, and now it's just having an absolute fucking blast. And it just seems like with each and every single scene that both Miles Teller as well as Anya Taylor-Joy are having an absolute blast with the material, because the material gives them a unique opportunity to exercise muscles as actors that a lot of other action movies and science fiction movies would not. Because they're communicating across this gorge, they are doing so without dialogue. And so it's almost like a similar style of acting as like silent movies with pantomime, where through their eyes and their smiles, they're having to communicate. And of course, Anya Taylor-Joy has the world's biggest fucking eyeballs that are incredibly expressive. So she's uniquely equipped for a movie like this. And she just gives it her all. And I was already in love with her with movies like The Witch or Furiosa and things like that, the Mad Max movie from last year. She's awesome. I'm a big fan. But because she appears to be having so much fun with the flirting and the acting and the dancing and all that stuff, it makes the movie considerably more enjoyable. But it must be said, this is one of those movies that comes dangerously close to destroying any sense of plausibility. And some movies need plausibility, and some movies do not. But if you start asking questions like, well, if this gorge is so dangerous and it's so important, how come there are only 2 people in secret guarding it who get replaced every year? You're like, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, how come there's not an entire army guarding? And they offer a few flimsy explanations along the way, but the reality is, if you think about it too long and hard, the movie can't happen, and the movie wants to happen. So you just kind of have to roll with it. It's a little bit like the movie Rear Window, but it's kind of like you have dueling Rear Window situations. And I like movies about voyeurism, because movies about voyeurism kind of get at the root of what is like the act of watching movies itself, and like why we're so obsessed with watching movies like Body Double, where voyeurism's a key component of the story. But it's interesting how both Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller are kind of watching the other person's movie. And that's a fun, interesting thing for a director to experiment with, because voyeurism is one of the key components of just the art of cinema. But without giving anything away, when it comes to plausibility, I'll say that the movie becomes more believable by the end, but at the expense of what makes the first half so compelling, because the mystery is lost. And the mystery of what's within the gorge, that is what makes the first half so fascinating, because like when Miles Teller is climbing across, like, oh fuck, like is a giant monster going to come out and swallow him, or what is in the gorge? I don't think they ever should have shown us what was in the gorge, or maybe wait until the very last shot of the movie. But the ending they chose is cool. This is not a spoiler, it's just a music choice. The movie makes excellent use of one of the all-time great rock and roll tunes, All Along the Watchtower. And when I heard the immediately recognizable notes from the beginning of that song, I was like, all right, that was a perfect choice, because it ties in beautifully with the themes and the action of this movie. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. I honestly got a few little chills during the All Along the Watchtower action sequence. This movie definitely delivers when it comes to the action. But as reluctant as I am to criticize this movie, it also must be said that within the gorge, without saying what happens, there's some cool stuff, some creepy stuff that will give you the heebie-jeebies. And there are also some scenes where you're like, this is idiotic. Like, that's some of the dumbest shit I've ever seen. So the movie has its flaws, but, a low-budget, down and dirty, self-contained, one-off science fiction movie. it does not get destroyed by a few silly ingredients, because back in the 1990s, we used to get all kinds of cool one-off science fiction movies that were not designed to be part of an ongoing story or a franchise or a shared universe. Like forgotten gems like The Cube, or like, God damn, like whatever happened to just cool, like self-contained science fiction movies made on a lean and mean budget. And I feel like a lot of other directors out there who are working with considerably larger budgets, like take a movie like, what was that stupid fucking AI movie which came out, Creator or The Creator. I can't remember if it was just called Creator or The Creator. You know, big giant budget, just bland, forgettable, bloated, had no heart, no emotion, no fun, no entertainment value. I thought the movie was wildly overrated. Give me a movie like The Gorge all day, every day over a movie like Creator. Especially when it's a movie that kind of leans into the natural charisma and star power and sexiness of its two leads. This movie probably would not work if the two leads were not attractive, but it's one of those situations where like, when, if, and how are they finally going to get a chance to bang after all this sexual tension kind of staring at each other across the gorge for months on end? And the good news is the movie does at least finally give them a chance to meet face to face. And yeah, it is a very solid Valentine's Day movie, a surprise unlooked for. And having now seen it, I'm much more excited to see what Scott Derrickson has in store for us with Black Phone 2 later this fall. It's not often where directors get to release two movies in the same year, but Osgood Perkins is doing the same thing this year as well. Osgood Perkins has The Monkey coming out this week, and he has a movie called Keeper coming out in the fall. So am I making too much of this, or does it seem like unpretentious thrillers and science fiction and horror movies and fantasy movies seem to be making a comeback? Movies that are much more economical in length, much more modest in scale and budget, where they're not trying to build giant franchises, they're not trying to change the world, they're just trying to entertain the audience for a few short hours, and sometimes that is enough. So high five to Scott Derrickson, high five to Zach Dean. This is not going to be anybody's new favorite science fiction movie, but there's so few good Valentine's Day movies. Who knows? Maybe it'll be kind of an unofficial new favorite Valentine's Day movie for a lot of people if they happen to watch it 2 days. So I hope I've managed to put this movie on a few more people's radar. It absolutely deserves to be seen, but perhaps my enjoyment of it was magnified where nobody was talking about it. I just watched it at random, and maybe I indulge in a few mind-altering substances beforehand just to kind of get into the zone. But like I said before, I'll take one half of an excellent science fiction movie over a 100% mediocre movie like a lot of other movies that we get in the theater. So shame on you, Apple, for not giving more of a theatrical push or marketing push for this movie, but here I am doing my little part with my little YouTube channel, trying to shine a light on a pretty goddamn good science fiction movie. In any event, I hope everybody has a great weekend. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.